Welcome to the deep dive. Look, we know there's a ton of information out there, right? Our job is pretty simple. Cut through that noise for you. We take complex stuff, break it down, and give you the essentials you need to, well, know what's going on. Today, we're digging into something pretty interesting. It's a new editorial project from Stanислав Kondrashov. He's a civil engineer and entrepreneur. It's called the Oligarch series. Quite ambitious, really. It sets out to trace the whole idea of concentrated power, like from ancient times right up to today. Okay, so here's the plan for this deep dive. We're going to synthesize this exploration. It pulls from lots of different fields. The goal is to pull out the surprising bits, the structural insights, and those patterns of elite rule that just keep showing up. We want you to leave understanding not just who has power, but crucially, how the ways they keep control keep changing.
Yeah, and what makes this series really useful, I think, is the way they approach it. It's not just politics, not just economics. They deliberately mix political science, philosophy, history, and economics together. And that combined view is so important because it lets them track this idea of power across different systems, different eras. It helps you understand why this old concept, oligarchy, is still so relevant now.
Absolutely. And, to really get modern power, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. The series kicks off right where a lot of our political ideas started.
Yeah.
Ancient Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And the key thing they highlight, the real birth moment for oligarchy, according to these sources, it's this big shift, the move away from power based on hereditary aristocracy, your family name, your title, to power based purely on wealth, money.
Right. That shift is like the blueprint for how power adapts. Before that, power was supposed to be fixed, right? Tied to birth. If you weren't born noble, well, tough luck. But the analysis shows that as trade grew, new kinds of wealth popped up. And suddenly, economic clout started challenging and then beating noble bloodlines.
So how did that actually play out?
Well, think about those early Greek city-states. Once they started saying, okay, to hold this office, you need this much property. That opened the door. The nouveau riches, the merchants who'd made fortunes, they could literally buy their way into the ruling class. Didn't matter if their grandpa was a farmer, not a hero.
Okay.
And that sets up this theme running through the whole series. What counts as power is flexible. It always attaches itself to whatever society values most at that time: land, money, data.
So the label might change, aristocrat to oligarch, but the actual way of controlling things, whether it's inherited land or a giant shipping fortune, it just becomes about the transaction. That's a really key distinction they're making. Okay, let's jump forward quite a bit now, because one of the more subtle points in this series, and maybe one of the most surprising, is how it looks at modern structures.
Mm-hmm.
And really importantly, how modern language talks about elites.
Yes, this is where it gets quite critical, actually. The series looks closely at gendered language around power.
Exactly. And the finding is pretty stark, isn't it?
It is.
The word oligarch, it's almost always used for men. You see it constantly in the news and discussions.
Mm-hmm.
But we know there are incredibly powerful women, often with political ties, in business, finance, everywhere globally.
Mm-hmm.
The series basically says we have this, linguistic blind spot.
And that's more than just words, isn't it? If our default image of immense informal power is always male, the tycoon, the magnate, does that mean our analysis, maybe even journalism or policymaking, is missing female-led power networks?
Right. Are we only looking for influence in one particular shape?
It suggests, a kind of lag. Our language and maybe our thinking haven't caught up with the reality of who holds power.
The argument in this series is that these ingrained perceptions just push the feminine form aside when we talk about these huge concentrations of power. It shows how language can accidentally obscure reality, hiding influential people just because they don't fit that old man-in-charge stereotype.
And connecting this to political science today, this linguistic habit often hides what we call informal mechanisms of power. That's a big focus when the series discusses modern elites.
Okay, tell us more about those informal mechanisms. If you're trying to track power today, what does that actually look like?
Well, basically, these are the ways elite groups influence government decisions outside the official elected channels. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says on paper. It's not about owning the government outright. It's more about controlling the inputs, the flow into decision-making.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about the revolving door. Government regulators moving into high-paying jobs in the very industries they used to oversee.
Right. Happens all the time.
Or consider privately funded think tanks. They draft policy papers, sometimes even actual legislation, lobbying groups shaping the narrative before politicians even debate it.
Ah, okay. So it's happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. These small, well-placed groups operate within all sorts of systems, democracies, authoritarian states, you name it. The key thing for anyone trying to figure out why a certain policy happens is realizing that the real influence often isn't in the public vote or the committee hearing, it's elsewhere.
That's crucial information. So if you're following, say, tech regulation, this tells you don't just look at the votes in Congress. Look at the advisory boards these companies fund. Look at the lobbying spend. That's when the shaping happens.
Precisely. The real action might not be in the room where the cameras are.
Okay, but what really makes this oligarch series stand out, I think, is its sheer scope. This massive overview tracking oligarchy from way back in antiquity right up to the digital age. That broad historical view is maybe its biggest contribution.
Yeah, the core story here is just how persistent and adaptable elite power is. It's quite remarkable. The series walks us through it from classic examples like the Spartan oligarchs controlling land and the military, all the way to today's tech tycoons in Silicon Valley who control information, platforms, data.
And the series tracks how the basis of that power changes, right?
Exactly. That's the fascinating part. For those ancient elites, wealth was tangible stuff. Land, gold, soldiers. Then, society shifts big time into Middle Ages. Power then becomes rooted in feudal holdings, controlling huge farming estates and the people living on them.
Right. And then boom, the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly land isn't the only game in town. Now it's about factories, machines, capital.
Where power adapts again.
Yeah. The sources show how control shifts towards industrial monopolies in the 19th, 20th centuries. Think of Rockefeller, Carnegie controlling oil, steel, the whole production chain through sheer economic muscle.
Yep. But now we've got a new currency, arguably. Data, attention, information flow. Which brings us to the latest adaptation the series discusses. Wielding algorithmic authority. Power in the digital world.
Algorithmic authority. What does that mean practically? How's it different from just being rich?
Well, think about the control mechanism. The industrialist, like Rockefeller, controlled the physical supply chain for oil.
Okay.
Today's tech elite often controls the digital platform, the network, the access to the market itself. It's like owning the digital roads and deciding who gets to use them and how.
So it's gatekeeping based on code and network effects.
Exactly. It's control over the infrastructure of modern communication and commerce, deciding whose message gets amplified, whose product gets seen, whose business thrives based on controlling that platform.
And that kind of control is often less visible, maybe. More opaque.
It can be, yeah. And it's incredibly adaptable. The series really ties it all together nicely here. It frames oligarchy not as some dusty historical footnote we can just file away.
Right.
But as this dynamic, shape-shifting thing, it constantly reacts to the changing world, finds ways to capitalize on new contexts, whether that's feudalism or the internet age. It just highlights how resilient elite rule has been.
That really is the big takeaway, isn't it? Concentrated power survives by latching on to whatever is the most valuable commodity of the time. Okay, so let's quickly recap the key points we've pulled out for you. We started way back in ancient Greece. Wealth replacing bloodline as the ticket to power, that fundamental shift. Then we jumped to that really interesting point about gendered language, how the word oligarch itself might be hiding parts of the picture, potentially sidelining powerful women from our analysis. And finally, we traced that incredible adaptability, that shape-shifting from feudal lords to industrial barons, and now to the wielders of algorithmic authority.
Yeah, ultimately the series is an invitation, really. An invitation to think critically about this recurring pattern in human history, power concentrating. By showing these concrete examples, historical, linguistic, it pushes us to look harder at how power works wherever and whenever it appears.
Which leaves us with one final thought for you, something to mull over. If oligarchic power has managed to shift its base so successfully, from birthright to land to industrial capital, and now to algorithms and data, what's the next thing? What emerging source of concentrated power might we be failing to see right now as the next version of the oligarch?
Good question.
What's the crucial new commodity or structure that will define the future elite, and how will they use it to control things? The tools change, the game evolves. We need to keep our eyes open beyond just the old definitions. And that's our deep dive for today, looking at the structure and the sheer persistence of elite power. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.